Sibilance. Sibilance.
Check, mic check.
Check. 1, 2. Here we are. Welcome to I guess it's another, it's the right day. It's Friday. Okay, we're back on Friday. Last week was the day we were off. Another edition of Generation Xennial. Keith and Vinnie here to talk about maybe some good news today. Vaccinations coming your way.
Yes, the vaccinations are on the way.
Already started in the Great Britain.
Yes, the first one's getting in Great Britain this week. I still think we have a long ways to go before they're spread out community-wide and to everybody regularly, but it's definitely a good first step. And yeah, some positive news in this dreary world that we live in today.
I mean, it's probably the fastest we've ever seen it is the fastest we've ever seen a vaccine created, but that's largely because governments have spent billions of dollars and given that to different pharmaceutical companies to invest in this and get it done, because it's the first thing that's been this big that's affected us so broadly, I think, around the world, that we need.
At least 100 years, right? At least 100 years. And 100 years ago, I don't know what kind of mechanisms they had to create vaccines. Right. I don't think vaccines were widely available for the Spanish flu epidemic.
No, exactly. So thank God it's here. Like I said, Britain already approved it. Canada approved it 2 days ago. And as of this recording on Friday, yesterday, the FDA advisory board recommended it for immediate approval. So last report I heard was as early as Monday, we'd be getting Pfizer vaccines in the US being issued.
Now the issue becomes getting people to take the vaccine, getting people to trust the vaccine.
Right.
Because as we know, there's a fairly large anti-vaccination movement in the United States and across the world.
Which always amazes me.
It does amaze me. But people are always skeptical of these things. And I can't blame people for being skeptical. I can sometimes blame people for being skeptical without reason or evidence. Right. But yeah, this vaccine, like you said, came out very fast. One of the fastest produced vaccines probably the fastest produced vaccine that we've ever had. So I kind of understand that level of distrust, especially with all the misinformation about vaccines out there. So you don't want to fault people for that, but at the same time, we need to educate people about how this vaccine works, and hopefully enough people will trust it to take it, and we can get to that, I believe, 75% threshold that we kind of need to squash the virus per se.
Yeah, I totally get where there's mistrust. I mean, first of all, we have the anti-vax movement that's been going on for almost 2 decades, or if not longer now, which just always confounds me because people, first there was that now defunct paper that showed that vaccines cause autism, which has been disproven multiple times.
But that's another thing that people will keep.
They'll keep bringing it up. Repeating. The one paper, and they forget how science works. You have to be able to repeat, and the person that wrote it even said it was wrong, and they've been disbarred and all. Not disbarred, but because they're not on
the paper's basically been disqualified,
discredited, and all that stuff. But people, because enough celebrities got on board with it and it got pushed, and when people start putting a list of like, oh, look at all these things that are in the vaccine, they don't understand what vaccines are made of. Oh, there's mercury in it, and like, yeah, the little mini trace amount of mercury because there's fish oil in there to help. Right. Yeah, that's part of how it binds together. But when you take people that are not scientists and they try to analyze a scientific thing, you get all this, pseudoscience junk, and people create this whole anti-vax movement, which is sad.
That happens with everything too, right? Because it's like we talk about this a lot, and how people who want to spread misinformation don't necessarily come out and just lie straight up to you. What they do is they use little bits of true information to mislead you in a different direction, and then that leads you down a path that ultimately ends up with the wrong ideas and wrong result. But they're not. Then when you turn around and say, well, then it's come out and say, like, I wasn't lying to you, was I? Like, I was using truthful information, but just using that little bit of truth or kernel of truth to lead you down the wrong path. And we see that time and time again when it comes to misinformation.
Yeah, here's a little bit of fact to go along with a lot of non-fact, and we, it gets all construed. But there are some communities that I understand they have mistrust, because if you look back and just a couple decades ago, there was a whole African American community that was experimental drugs were done on them without their consent.
Well, yeah, you have things like
you
the
have a history
Tuskegee
of like,
experiment. I've seen that brought up, and
which I
um,
get why that community has distrust, and we have to do a lot of work to overcome that distrust.
exactly,
And
because
that's
and
a
what you're
different
going to
kind
see
of
is,
thing than
and you've already seen
anti-vaxxer.
it, that this poor communities have been hit the hardest by the coronavirus, understandably. They have less access to healthcare, tougher, usually tighter living conditions, usually in a more urban packed setting.
Right.
So population density is higher. So you're gonna see more cases in those kind of areas, and those are the areas that we really do need to
The people that rely on more
fumigate
public
with the virus.
transportation, so
Right.
they're in close
I mean,
contact
there's
with people more.
you
I saw
think
that
about
early
you
on.
think
You're
about a
like,
city compared to a suburb, right? And
yeah,
you have thousands of people basically living on top of each other in these
it
massive apartment buildings and tenements.
doesn't even have to be a
Um,
city. It could just be a large town. Even you still have low income housing in one section. They're living in apartments and they're all taking the bus, versus people that have a single family home and have cars that can drive around. It's a whole different
well,
dynamic.
yeah. I mean,
You
that's
know,
obvious, but my point being is that these are the places that are going to be the hardest to not only distribute the vaccine to, but also some of the hardest places that are going to have people that are going to be willing to take the vaccine. And I think that's something that's kind of important and
Mhm.
going forward with the hopefully Biden administration,
Well, I mean,
because we're still in the midst of a coup.
I mean, so you're bringing it there already. It didn't take
It's on my
long to get
mind.
to
It is on my mind. It's weighing heavy on my mind, actually, because it's
Texas.
one of these things, and we keep talking about it, and we keep going back to it, and we knew this was going to happen. This was going to happen in 2016 if we lost. This is happening now. I never expected to get to this point where now you have attorney generals of states wanting to overturn election results
Other
in other
states.
states,
What happened to states' rights?
which is, yeah, well, that's the easy go-to argument, right? Is
Well,
like
these are the same
all
people
these
that would argue
Republicans,
for
all these
states' rights,
conservatives who have been crying states' rights for decades and
and now they're trying to overturn
centuries
another
even.
state's election.
Right now, they want to overturn other states' elections, basically saying that they're voting they were being unconstitutional in their election, and this does kind of speak to a need for a federal regulations on voting. I would have no problem with that as long as the regulations were fair.
Especially
But
if you're talking about uh, federal elections. You're talking about the presidential
yeah,
election. If you want there to be a standard, make a standard.
right.
Um,
I would have no issue with that as long as the standards were fair to each state and didn't infringe on the rights of each state to send electors to vote. Yeah, I think we should have some kind of federal standards, and I think this issue kind of speaks to that. Now, will anything come out of this that will we get any kind of federal regulations on voting? No, because
probably not anytime soon.
people don't actually want it, right? People want their states to be able to basically choose how they want to elect
And let's
their
be honest,
representatives and
for the
not
majority of the
and send
history,
their electors.
for the majority of history, it hasn't been a huge problem in that regards. I mean, talk about voting suppression aside. I'm talking about just the general idea of like the state runs an election. These are the results. They pass off the results to the federal election, and no one in history. I don't know of a case where all of a sudden, we decided who the president was, and the state said no, that's wrong, and now we have states saying no, that's wrong. We have Texas saying that's wrong, or at least the attorney general of Texas, and you have high-ranking officials arguing with each other about it, and you have, unfortunately, then down the line, you have election officials in these states getting death threats, having to go into hiding.
Well, that's the scary thing, and I think, and I'm still big part of my worry concern is the reaction, not only going on right now, not only moving forward. Monday will be the date that the electors actually get
Right.
together and vote on the president. But even up until the inauguration and afterwards, I don't know how people are going to react. And we're not going to see it in the places that we are, right? I mean, I think in New York and Connecticut, respectively, I think being
No.
heavily blue
Yeah, Texas is not going to sue
democratic
to
states.
overturn our results because
You know,
we were going to be blue either way. So
I don't think we're going to see a big march of like, the red areas from our states like arming up and trying to do,
well,
militias or
here's
anything.
my
But I do worry about the rest of the country, right? I do worry about places like Arizona, and I do worry about places like even like Michigan and
right.
and Pennsylvania. What's going to happen in those states when will people descend on the state houses, and who knows? Because this is getting riled up to the point where this is becoming a legitimate concern, whereas before, and I think a lot of people wrote it off and it as a joke. But we've had this conversation how many times? Like, stop. We need to stop writing off Donald Trump as a joke, right?
Yeah, it's too late for that.
We've been doing it for 5 years now, ever since he or 6 years, whatever. Ever since he came down that escalator and said, "I'm running for president," everyone's taking him as a joke, and every time he's come out and been able to somehow come out on top, right?
Right.
So this is just another situation where I'm like, you stop treating this man like a joke. Like, number one, he's destroying the democratic process as we know it, right? Every presidential candidate from here on out will be able to use this as a method of delegitimizing the president, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, right? A Democrat candidate doing this, I think, would politically harm themselves by
Yeah, I
trying to
think
pull
it would
something like this.
backfire.
But conservative politics are a different breed, especially when you start talking about like the base. They don't care. They really don't. They don't care. They want to win. They really think that this vote was illegal and states cheated and votes came out of nowhere. I heard somebody in the bagel shop yesterday. I overheard them talking about how all these votes came in overnight, and we've debunked this how many times. But if as long as you're not looking for that information, you're not going to find it, right? And that becomes an issue. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if anybody does, but it's still going to be an interesting month. Leading into the actual inauguration.
Yeah, like you said. So first of all, I've been thinking because Texas, the lawsuit as I read it is like they want to throw out the results of those 4 states.
Right, basically
not
saying,
overturn it, just throw them out. So the question is,
basically saying that those states elected their president unconstitutionally.
But so if you throw out those 4 states, then wouldn't Biden still have more electoral votes than Trump? I didn't run the numbers, but I think he would.
I think you'd come into a situation where neither one of them would have the majority needed.
Well, you can't at that point.
Right, and that then turns the Constitution says that if neither candidate or no candidates get a majority of the electoral votes, then it goes to the House of Representatives.
Well,
but not individual House of Representatives. It goes to state houses. So basically, whoever the representatives are would then vote in that state. And I think the state houses most have the majority controlled by Republicans. So Trump would end up still winning the presidency. I think that's the ultimate goal. The other thing I think about a lot too is, does Trump believe this, or is this just a tool of his to, number one, delegitimize the Biden presidency and also fundraise for himself? Because he's making a lot of money off of this right now. He's getting a lot of donations.
I definitely think fundraising is part of it because I think he needs the money, first of all.
100% he needs the money.
The other day I was talking about this. I think that but part of it, I honestly think that I've had this conversation multiple times with people. I think if you look at Trump himself as a person in history, like you can tell he never played a team sport. He never played a sport as a kid because he doesn't know how to lose. He doesn't understand that he can lose. Like in his career, he doesn't understand losing. In his show, he doesn't understand. Like he's always been the winner. He's always been in charge. So he doesn't understand the concept of losing for him personally. So I feel like there's some sort of mental block in there where he just literally cannot understand that he can actually lose.
Right, and that's what I'm hearing, right? And that's what I'm hearing from a lot of pundits is that this is his ideology, that he doesn't know how to lose. He's a sore loser.
Not that he's a sore loser. I just think he can't mentally understand that he can lose.
Right.
I think that's a difference. A sore loser is a person that flips the table over when they lose a board game. That's a sore loser.
Fair enough.
I'm talking about he's a person.
Well, he's flipping the board and saying I won, right? He's saying his game was rigged and I won. So yeah, I guess
exactly.
I guess that's different.
A sore loser flips the board and walks away. They rage quit and break their keyboard kind of thing. Where he's just like, no, I'm gonna push the table to the side and be like, no, I still won, and give me my money. And he's gonna wait for you. You're playing poker with him. He throws out, deuce 7, and you got pocket aces. He's gonna be like, okay, give me the money. I won.
Yeah, he's gonna say that. What are you talking about? There were three other 2s and 3 other 7s on the board, even though you're only playing Texas Hold'em.
So,
but that's what I wonder. I wonder, does he really believe his own BS, or is this just a ploy? And that's very interesting. I think it's a little bit of both. It doesn't ultimately matter. Not really. It doesn't really matter in the outcome. I
think
what's
more dangerous is all the other Republicans that. And this is why I think, I think there are definitely some entrenched Republicans that believe everything that he says, that follow him to the end, because I don't know why, but they do. But I also think that I think, and I kind of hope that there's a large amount of Republicans that are, I'm not talking about electors, I'm talking about actually elected officials, that, because we've seen it over the past couple of years, where if you are a Republican that goes against Trump, you die.
It's not political suicide.
But it's political suicide. So I think a lot of them are like, okay, we are going to back whatever he says until he's no longer relevant, because it's behoven on our own personal gain. Like if we go against him, then we also lose, and we don't want to lose. And that goes back to, they don't want to lose. They're afraid of getting kicked out of office because someone else is going to come.
Right, well, no one wants to lose their election, right? No, like this is basically their job, right? They're interviewing.
But unlike other jobs, they continue to get paid afterwards. So
this is true too.
Like if you're a congressperson, if you lose your job, you still get paid afterwards, like for the rest of your life. It's not like you don't get money.
And you'll be fine, because most of them just go into lobbying and then make.
And even
make
if
more
you
money.
don't, honestly, I always thought about this. Like, say you ran, you just were a senator or a congressperson for, representative for one term, you're gonna make more than I make in a year.
Oh yeah.
For the rest of your life. Yeah. Like you can have a very comfortable life.
I mean, the sad thing is that a lot of the congressmen and senators, and
they want more and more and more.
We'll make more money outside of office, right?
Yeah, but I mean, just on the payroll check of the government.
Here's an interesting scenario, because obviously this election cycles don't stop.
Never.
In 2 years, we will be electing.
Especially if you're House of Representatives.
Right, we'll be electing a new House in 2 years. And what happens to these Republican congressmen, especially the congressmen, who might get primaried by a Trump supporting Republican in 2 years, and not standing up to the Democrats or the quote unquote election fraud, that's not going to look good in 2 years. And I think that's why a lot of the
they're either not saying anything at all.
106 of the representatives right now are backing this.
Last week, the Washington Post had a poll out, and only 27 Republicans in the Congress have acknowledged Biden's victory.
Right.
27 out of 250 something. I forget the.
You mean publicly acknowledged?
Yeah, they responded to the survey, and they publicly acknowledged that Biden was the next president of the United States.
Right. But what happens now when we have 106 Republican Congress people right now currently saying that we supporting the Texas lawsuit, right? So what happens to those? I don't know how many total there are, but the other ones that didn't come out and publicly support this lawsuit in 2 years, when they're getting primaried and their opponent comes out and say they didn't support Donald Trump's lawsuit, we know Biden's an illegitimate president, they're not standing up to him, vote for me, I'll stand up to Joe Biden. And then this is just going to permeate, honestly, just more fascism.
So call me optimistic, if you will.
You're being optimistic. I'm glad someone is, though, Keith. Someone needs to be optimistic.
I'm going to be hopeful here. How's that? I'm going to be hopeful. Is that, first of all, I think part of it's going to really based on, on the other end of this pandemic, we looking at the fall of 2021 now, or on the other end of this, hopefully. what does Biden do? Are people working again? Are they, if people are working and the economy is good and we're out of a pandemic, does that change people's minds? I know there's hardcore people that they'll never change their mind. It doesn't matter what they're doing. But if you get people back to work, and if Biden gets people back to work and back in school, and they're not getting government assistance, and they're not wearing face masks all the time anymore, does that change their mindset?
No, I don't think so, because
Probably
Trump still
not.
got elected in 2016, right? When before all this happened,
It's true.
and it's more of a cult of personality, right? It's not. It's they don't base their lives on what's going on in
Logic.
reality, or what's going on as the country as a whole, right? They base their ideology on their ideology, and right now their ideology is Trump is the best thing that's ever happened to America. He's saving America. The whole MAGA movement, right, was
Right.
like, make America great again is just, it's a slogan. It doesn't mean anything. There's no real ideology or policy behind MAGA. It's just make America great again, obviously. And right, so that's what you're up against, and you're up against these things in like hardcore Republican districts, right? I think we're
Right.
kind of insulated to this, living where we do. Even in New York State or in Connecticut, where you do have pockets of red counties and whatnot, you don't have this like Trumpism fever that you do in other places, and even we do see it in
we get the pickup trucks here and there,
but it's not as, what's what I'm looking for? It's not as applicable, right? It's not as applicable, right? It doesn't. Yeah. It's not gonna. But I do worry about these places where now you're just gonna have hardcore Trumpers getting elected in 2 years to the House, and what does that do? I mean, you even see an uptick in this past election of the Democrats didn't do as well as they should have in the House. I think a lot of that has to do with Nancy Pelosi and her leadership. I think we need to start moving on from. I
agree.
The more moderate liberals.
I think it was.
I think you'll get a lot of people that disagree with that, though, because.
Well, I think it was right for her to stay as the speaker while Trump was still in
office.
100%.
Yeah,
I think you need someone with that experience to be at the head of the ship at that time.
Yeah, at the same time, I'm not arguing that. I think she kind of was the right person for the job for the past 2 years.
You need someone that was going to be stern enough to stand up to him. But I think now,
but going forward,
the Biden administration, we can. It's time to pass that baton to the next generation.
Another thing, she's just been so demonized now over the past, like, how many years that she's been House Speaker was a bill.
Well, the problem is
it's the same thing with Hillary Clinton, right?
Everyone's demonized
Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had been demonized for 20 years in the media.
Career. The Clintons were demonized by the Republican Party since they were in Arkansas.
Yeah, which is funny because basically they were just like light conservatives, right? I mean, no one was arguing, like, no one looking back now, like you wouldn't talk about Bill Clinton being a radical Marxist.
Well, he's not.
He's not. Neither was Hillary. But look at that. But look at Joe Biden getting called things like radical Marxist. And,
he's a radical.
The socialist Joe Biden.
He is. Joe Biden is nothing but a centrist, moderate. He believes in the Senate. He believes in legislation. He wants to do the best for everybody on both sides. He doesn't want to go too far right, too far left. He wants to drive down the middle. And that's where.
Does that win moving forward? And that's the question I think everyone has to answer. Because
I think it obviously won now, but I think in like you said, in 2 years and 4 years. A lot of it's going to be depending. So the rumor is that everyone's talking about is that Trump is going to launch his re-election campaign the day before or the day of the inauguration. Like, that's the rumor right now, is that he's going to run in 2024. So if he does run in 2024, you're just continuing Trumpism. It's going to continue on nonstop for the next 4 years for sure. I mean, it's going to continue either way. But as long as he is still either running or in the spotlight somehow, he's still going to lead a movement. Even if he's not in office, he's still going to.
Yeah, no, Trump is not going away, and I think a lot of people recognize that, and he's still going to be the de facto leader of the Republican Party, whether or not Republicans like that or not, because he does still have massive popularity within the Republican Party throughout the country.
And I think that's why people like Mitch McConnell and stuff like that are just kind of on board, because they realize people follow him. and they don't want to lose control of the ship. So they're like, they're almost like letting him drive, but they still want a hand on the wheel.
Well, that brings back my point. Like, if someone like Mitch McConnell came out and said Trump's being ridiculous, he lost the election, he needs to get over it, like, he would be done. Like, Mitch McConnell would be primaried out of the even the contest next time around.
Well, he's got another 6 years.
He wouldn't even be reelected. He wouldn't even make it past the primary. And that's kind of where we're at now. Is, places seem to be so locked in, either Republican or Democratic, that the primaries obviously almost mean more in a lot of these places than the actual general elections.
So, this kind of brings me to an idea that I've been hearing about this week. They're talking about bringing back earmarks into bills. So they were 8-10 years ago, we took out earmarks. So basically, here's a big bill, I'm going to slip a little bit in. So, my county and whatever state gets a little money for XYZ thing. It got taken out because a lot of, there were a lot of kickbacks going the wrong direction to contractors and things like that. But there is also where good things happening where, there's this big bill, and for me to agree with it, maybe it's a Democratic bill, but I'm a Republican senator, and I'll agree to it if I can get $500,000 for this education program in my city. If you can get a little money my way in this larger bill, then I'll say yes to it. So it was in the old days, it was a way to kind of bridge that gap. And if you look at the evidence in the last 10 years, we've kind of gone, hard line right or left, and we haven't had any crossover. So the question is, if we bring that back, would it help out with the stalemate we see in Congress? I know it's a good question, huh?
It's a really good question, because I'm not sure how to answer that.
Well, I mean, I'll talk about it because, like, at first, like when they talked about getting rid of it, I was like, yeah, let's get rid of that. It doesn't make sense. Why are we putting all this stuff in? But as I learned more about how government works in general and how people work, just how people work, you're more likely to agree to do something if you get a little bit out of it.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to defend a bill too if you're saying, well, I'm voting for this because it's going to help out our community, because people obviously look out for the people closest to them first.
So yeah, there should be some safe marks to make sure XYZ contractors not getting a kickback.
Right, that becomes the question, right?
And that's why I got taken care of.
How do you stop the corruption in politics if you reintroduce that?
Well, here's the other question, and I think this is the larger question with it. How do you stop corruption? This is always like the big thing, like when people like we talk about like food stamp benefits or whatever, things like that. People always go like, well, not everyone that gets it needs it. It's like, but do you want to not do it because some people abuse it versus all the people that actually benefit from it? So
yeah, but I guess it's one of those. It depends on what level too, because
But it's just another thing to think about, where it's like, yeah, there might be a little bit of abuse over here, but a lot of benefit over here. So is that like, people always say like, oh, don't give our money to the homeless person on the street. They're probably not homeless at all. I'm like, you know what? I don't think that everyone that out there begging for money is, scamming.
Trying to rip people off. Right.
I rather, go on the odds that they do need the money, and I'm going to give it to them. And if that 1 out of 10 is ripping me off, at least I helped 9 other people.
Well, I guess you can relate this to the same kind of arguments like for and against term limits, right? Because on the surface, term limits for Congress seems like a great idea, right? These people have been there for too long. They get complacent. They stop working for the people. Blah blah blah. But at the same time, if you take that away and you start forcing people out, you're just going to have a massive turnover of Congress. And who's gonna suck up that vacuum is the lobbyists, because these people are going to
who has
coming into office and not without much experience, and who are they going to turn to? And the lobbyists are going to be there saying, hey, this is what you should do.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same argument. Like, how do you fix the world, I guess?
Can we have a mandatory retirement age though?
What's that?
Can we have a mandatory retirement age?
I can't even agree with that, because then it turns into like ageism.
I know, that's true.
Do you means test someone's cognitive ability before they take office? How do you determine that? Like, I think you're alluding to the Dianne Feinstein comments coming out this week that she's.
No, I wasn't even.
Did you hear about that?
No.
Apparently, she's getting to her cognitive abilities isn't doing well, and she's forgetting things during right after briefing, and this is all I don't I don't prescribe to like I don't know how much this is actually happening and how much this is just media hoopla, but but it's that kind of idea, right? Like, but yeah, I don't want to start into an ageism discussion where we're going to say, well, you're too old to be in office. Like that's kind of icky, right? That's kind of cringe.
No, you're right. It is, but well, look at I can't think of what town it was in right now or what state. I mean, there was a 70-year-old newly minted Speaker of the House. It's killing me that I can't think of what state. Oh, that was poor choice of words because he just died of COVID this week, like yesterday, right after he was elected to be Speaker of the House in the state. I forget what state it was.
I think I did hear that story too, but I'm kind of.
But then, remember. If you look what happened, they had an unmasked. There was a indoor event of the Republican representatives, and they were unmasked, and a bunch of people contracted COVID during that, and he was 71, and he died.
Well, how many weeks have we been talking about this COVID fatigue, and this isn't stopping, right? It's just getting worse. It's just getting worse.
You know what doesn't get tired? COVID doesn't get tired.
The virus itself is not going to get tired of infecting people.
No,
so
it's going to keep doing
it. I think you hear this good news about a vaccine. I think that's going to kind of like loosen people up a little bit to the point where they're going to be like, oh, well, there's a vaccine coming. I don't have to worry about it as much. But until we get to a point where most people are vaccinated, it's still going to be a huge concern. And
by the time we get to that state, we're not going to be until the summer.
Like you still see people online talking about how it's not it only kills a small amount of people. Why are you worried about it? It's fine. Just live your life. We need to open.
And they don't realize that if we were all to just throw air masks now, open everything up, the number of people that'd be dying would
dramatically
elevate. It's so dramatically increase. Look at the increase since Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
We are talking about 9/11 style, rates of death
per day. Yeah.
Per day since a week after Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And this
we topped over 1,000 people in a day.
Like I think we predicted this. Like I don't think this wasn't a surprise to anybody because we knew it was coming.
Let's be honest. It was a surprise to a lot of people.
Okay, yeah.
Because they thought it was not real.
Not to us.
To people that understand science and respected the scientists, it was not a surprise to us.
No, and even recognize human behavior because you knew people weren't going to. Just quarantine for Thanksgiving and Christmas is coming around the corner and Christmas might even be a bigger transmitter of it.
No, my family, we've already decided. Well, at first back in near Thanksgiving, we were hopeful that maybe because enough of us were in early groups that might get the vaccine. Like my wife's getting it next week. She's already knows the hospital she works for. They've already sent out hey, who wants it? Let's and they're gonna start issuing it next week as soon as it's approved. So. She's getting it. My parents are in their 70s, so they're one of the early list people. My sister and her daughter both work in education. So that's another, that's the next people down the line. So the idea was depending on how fast it goes out, we might actually be able to get together for Christmas, but we know now it's not going to be fast enough for all that. So we've already decided with our family, we're not getting together for Christmas. We are going to do a Zoom thing next week while we make pierogies at separate locations.
That's cool. See,
that's the thing. We start making them together.
You got to find ways to kind of keep your sanity and keep your spirits up, but at the same time be safe because you look at the charts and I feel like I've been saying this for weeks, but you just look at the charts and it's just another spike. It's spike and spike and spike, and it's like when are people going to get it? And by the time people get it, it's going to be too late. We'll have a vaccine now. Hopefully, most people will take it.
I mean, look at the NFL. The NFL, which a system which theoretically put in all these contact tracing safeguards and all this. You're getting teams playing without quarterbacks and games are being rescheduled constantly. When is enough? I mean, obviously they're trying because they're profit driven. They're trying to make their money and all that stuff.
Well, and the players want to play because that's how the players make money too, right?
Right. But everyone, so at the beginning of the season, anyone that opted out of the season still got paid for the season.
That's great, and I'm sure that I'm sure that was bargained by the union.
But
The
yeah,
NFLPA has a very strong union, not as strong as the Major League Baseball, but they they do wield a lot of power, and I think that has a lot to do with
probably.
and that's why unionization is great. We need to still push unionization. That's another soapbox.
Yeah, well, definitely. That is yeah, that's a whole nother, let's not even talk about unionization today because we
We'll
could
be
that's
I know we got a little.
that's
We're on time limit this week, so we're
hour
gonna
and
get a
episode of self.
little short version. So yeah, we won't sit talking about that because that's a long story, and unionization rates in this country have just been plummeting
Plummeting
since
since the
since the
80s,
80s. I meant to say.
since Reagan.
Since Reagan,
Reagan
like
destroyed the
basically
unions.
dismantled all the unions, and what has happened since then? Wages have been stagnant, very stagnant
Yeah,
since Reaganism. So
exactly. Corporate profits
correlation,
have increased exponentially.
yeah,
You have Bezos, who's like, Bezos has increased his profit so much during the pandemic. He's a multi-billion, billionaire now.
yeah. I
And
mean,
I hate that I had to buy things from Amazon sometimes because I'm like, I try to actively find things other places, and then like, oh, I can only find it here, so here it goes.
right, but that's how capitalism works, right?
It is,
It almost forces your hand because you're like,
and
I could spend more money, but well, I can't spend more money. I can't afford to spend more money, so you end up
but
supporting businesses that you don't want to support, and
and
that's
what's sad is like he
turns
can
into a
afford to
circle.
pay all his workers more money. If he's making that much profit, that means everyone else below him can make more money.
Yes,
And
yeah. I
and
mean,
I'm talking
it's
about the people at the very bottom, the people that are in the warehouses busting their butts every day to get
right.
us our stuff. And you know what? I don't need 2-day Prime shipping. Honestly, don't. I don't need something here. And even sometimes, like I ship out, I just order because I have Prime. Everyone has Prime at this point, and I order it. When it comes the next day, I'm like, okay, I didn't need it here on Sunday. Like I didn't need someone to bend over backwards to get it to me. I honestly didn't. If I needed it that bad, I would have driven to the store and gotten it
Yeah.
if it was available at a store somewhere close to me.
Well, that's the thing
Um,
too, is like because of the online shoppings and retail stores have just kind of just starting to slowly wither away, aren't they? I mean, we closed our Best Buy in Kingston.
yeah, I mean
Best Buy.
that's gonna be the inevitability of the future, though. You're gonna see stores having smaller footprints. Look at FYE. Remember FYE back in the
Oh
Trumbull
my God,
Mall when we were in
huge.
college? It was huge. It had two entrances on both sides of the aisle, and you had all these CDs and movies and games and all this stuff. And now when you go to that mall, it's
Well,
still
ours
in
is
that mall.
gone.
But it's much smaller now. It's much small. It's like a Sam Goody size when Sam Goody was still
Yeah,
a thing.
you kind of saw that trend happening with a lot of the stores, especially in our mall, to the point where they would, the bigger stores would kind of go to a smaller location, and then an even smaller location, and then they were gone. And basically, our mall in Kingston, the Hudson Valley Mall, if anyone's in the area, is almost gone. Right?
Yeah,
There was a big Macy's anchor store there. That got turned into a Health Quest medical facility now, so that's completely gone. Best Buy just moved out. There's no restaurants in our mall. Like that's how bad it got.
that's the thing.
The food court turned into like one little pizza place. I don't even know if they're there anymore because I basically go to the mall now to get my haircut, and GameStop's still there.
Well,
That's
that was
the
like in our mall, the Milford Mall, or the Boston Post Road, the Connecticut Post Mall. There you go. That's the name of it. Yeah, they got the food court. There's a Buffalo Wild Wings. There was a Red Robin that opened and closed twice, and then there was like another location that had a restaurant that's probably like circulated 3 different restaurants in it. Like they just can't keep a regular restaurant open. And you're right. Like Sears is gone.
Sears has
Um,
gone everywhere. I think
Macy's
there's
is gone.
barely any Sears left. But there's also this is a great point. I guess we can almost end on this. Is that because of COVID-19 and the pandemic and the shutdowns, the way money is funneled to a lot of these bigger businesses is almost criminal because the smaller businesses didn't have that infrastructure to keep up with the bigger businesses, and this happens all the time. But I think COVID-19 kind of just exacerbated this whole trend where like these small businesses just can't survive, especially when you see a lot of the relief went to these bigger businesses, which is it should be criminal. Like the government should have stepped in and kept these small businesses afloat. You hear all these stories about these poor independent restaurants, right, that are just decimated because they couldn't pay their employees. They're not, a lot of these small restaurant owners aren't like super rich.
No,
right?
I mean, usually it's, I've worked in restaurants. You got family owned, husband and wife work it together, and they're working there. They're each working 70 hours a week at the restaurant. And they're scraping by.
Right.
And
this just hit them so hard, and not to have any relief, and they have to close their doors because of it. It's sad. It's not. It's, and your small town, like, home owned restaurants are usually the best restaurants in town, right?
Yeah.
Like, I do love I love my Buffalo Wild Wings. But even I love my Texas Roadhouse. But like, there's some really, really good, especially with the culinary nearby us. There are some really good restaurants.
Well, even a lot of the chain stuff is still locally owned because a lot of it's franchises.
A lot of franchise, but that's like saying McDonald's. That's like saying your locally owned McDonald's, right? Like,
well, there's different, because there's McDonald's owns a lot of restaurants.
Yeah, not in our area.
There's also franchise-owned ones as well.
A lot of the McDonald's in our area are franchised, but a lot of those owners aren't working in the restaurant 70 hours a week. They might claim that they're working a lot, but
I was thinking of the chain. I was like thinking more like your Buffalo Wild Wings or your Texas Roadhouse. A lot of times those are more in, when you're talking about like a fast food restaurant. Yeah, a lot of times one person owns like 10 of them.
Yeah, and they're just kind of like.
And they aren't actually in there. But if you have like a actual sit down serve restaurant, a lot of times those are more hands-on owners, even if they're franchises, because you have to be. A lot of times.
Yeah,
you got you got quality control.
Well, it does help. It does help your restaurant to be involved in it, and I think that's
this pandemic has decimated so many locally owned stuff, and the fact it's criminal that we have a Congress that can't get more relief out to people right now. It's criminal. And both sides of the aisle. It's just when you look at what other countries have done for their citizens, and what the $1,200 paycheck we've gotten, and the PPP loans that have gone out to some businesses, and the advanced or the extended unemployment benefits that expired long ago. It's just, there's so many things.
The super cynical part of me is worried that a lot of the Democrats did this for political reasons, because they didn't want to give Trump a quote unquote win, even though they could have touted their.
Although they did.
But,
the House passed two different bills that never got brought up to a vote in the Senate.
Well, yeah, and that's because of Mitch McConnell, but still, it doesn't really help.
Doesn't help us.
Doesn't help the Democrats when they didn't take some of the concessions that they probably should have took back in October. I think even Bernie Sanders addressed this week, saying it was a mistake not to take that bill, and now that they're thinking about taking a much lesser relief bill, just kind of rubs people the wrong way, because now it's easy to turn around and say, why didn't they take the bill back in October? They didn't want to help Trump, and it on the surface it seems like a very reasonable argument.
You could say, hey, why didn't we do that? But at some point, you just got to say, let's do what we can now.
100%.
At this point, like, yeah, we can have the debate. Next year, we can have all the debates we want about what we should have done in the past. Let's just do what we need to do.
Oh, and we will.
Now.
Trust me.
It's going to happen.
We will. Midterm elections are going to be very interesting.
People need relief now, though. Like you said, restaurants have hurt. People have gone out of business. Places have closed permanently for and places that have been well established. Before this happened, like we mentioned, retail places were already hurting before the pandemic because they were losing out. And it's really with the retail stuff, you're talking about like Sears and JCPenney and Macy's are losing out to Kohls and Target and Walmart because they're cheaper stuff, and it's selling to a different clientele nowadays.
Well, then that just goes along with the shrinking middle class too, right?
Right.
That all ties into that, is the middle class is shrinking, and the rich are getting richer.
Also, the idea of the department store is kind of an old idea at this point.
Yeah, but like you said, you still do see some stores having a lot of success in retail, and a lot of those are just like you said, but it's kind of like it's almost like a cheaper model, right? It's you're not going to be able to shop at your Macy's, so you go to a Kohl's, right? And
Right.
obviously the things in Kohl's are a little bit more on the cheaper side than they were back when Macy's was prevalent. But that all comes down to, like I said, it comes down to the middle class shrinking and people having less money and needing to save that money. And where are they going to save that money? They're going to be able to shop at stores that have
Hey, well,
less
Kohl's is
cost.
giving me a 30% off coupon. Plus, I can get all this Kohl's cash when I buy this
Kohl's
stuff.
marketing is just great too. Like
Plus,
from a marketing standpoint, I love that store because they'll be like 50% off, and it'll just be the same price that you would pay anywhere else. But it just feels like you're getting such a good deal. Like that's just really.
it's always really on the receipt. Like, look at all the money you saved it, and they circle it for you.
Oh yeah, that's just really good marketing. That I've always been impressed with Kohl's, like the way they do that, and it works for me too. I was just like, it feels like you're saving money, even though you might be paying like a few dollars less or so, but it just, oh my god, I got this huge sale, and then the Kohl's cash, which I always get, and I'm like, great, I got all those Kohl's cash, and then I forget about it.
But the thing is, that's the thing about the Kohl's cash. Like, it either forces you to come back next week, or you're done, or you're screwed.
Which again is just it's a great marketing play.
Like I totally lost out on $60 Kohl's cash last month at some point because I missed the dates.
See.
Like I totally forgot about it because we bought a lot of stuff. I buy stuff for the kids and I got $60 in Kohl's cash and then I don't know what happened to it.
Speaking of, I gotta do my Christmas shopping soon.
And I got the app on the phone too, so you pay with everything on the phone at the store now. It's just like, well, this way, all your coupons are in the app. So when you go to pay, you automatically add your coupons in, and then you just put the QR code and it scans it right to your Kohl's credit card.
So anyone from Kohl's, if you're listening, we could use some sponsors. It'd be great. We can make
like Kohl's.
we'll show for Kohl's. If you want to, we could do this every day if you pay us.
Well, so you got to pay us a lot if you want us to do this every day. Let's be honest.
I mean, yeah,
maybe twice.
When it comes to Kohl's, I'm sure they can afford it, but we're not that expensive.
I mean, and Kohl's, they do great shipping and returns. They also do Amazon returns at Kohl's now. They just
this is not a Kohl's commercial, Keith.
I'm sorry. Well, I just think about how newer companies do things leaner and lighter, and that's why they succeed over like Sears and JCPenney and Macy's because, old stores, they die out because the old model doesn't work forever.
Right. And well, JCPenney's had that awful marketing campaign where it's just like, oh, we're not going to do like $6.99 anymore. It'll just be a flat number. Like, what was that about? Like, I don't remember that. Like, anyway.
Yeah, JCPenney. That's a whole. We should just do a whole history on retail stores.
Yeah, go Wikipedia. But anyway,
in-depth history on why retail sucks.
Have you ever had a retail job?
I have. I worked at Eddie Bauer during college for 2 years in Westport. I worked at the Westport store, and when I was at home from break, I also worked at the one in the Manchester Mall.
See, I never did retail. I was a McDonald's guy. I worked at McDonald's for all my.
I worked the return line the day after Christmas, my first year.
Yeah, that's why. That's why.
It was actually working just the return line the day after Christmas. The day goes by so fast. Because all you're doing, there's people queued up.
Just forever.
And you kind of every couple minutes you yell at the policy again, like if you're getting exchange, go get the thing you want to exchange now. If you don't have a receipt, you're going to get store credit. If you have a receipt, you'll go back to whatever you paid it on, to the card, or you get cash if you have the receipt. And you just every couple of minutes you say it, and then people come up. Here's the thing. You sign the thing. It's
just so busy.
It becomes a process, and then all of a sudden your 8-hour shift is over.
Yeah. That was always the nice thing about McDonald's is it was always more fun when it was busy because you just sat there and you just did what you needed to do. If it was slow, then you ended up doing boring jobs like cleaning things, and that was never fun.
Oh man. Cleaning the cooktop in the kitchen, that's always fun. I actually, because I was a short order cook one year, and cleaning the cooktop, the scraper flipped and I scraped the skin off my wrist. So I'm cleaning a hot cooktop and it flipped over, and so scraped and cauterized at the same time.
Oof. Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah.
I don't think I never saw anything like that. Worst injury I saw at McDonald's was somebody dropped a hot coffee pot on their foot.
Oh,
that was not good. Ended up with
that's not good.
Pretty bad burns.
As we know, McDonald's coffee is pretty hot.
That's another story. I don't know if you know the whole story.
I
Did you
do.
ever
I
hear
do
that?
know the whole story about
About
that.
how like that was that was like the poster child for like the most frivolous lawsuit ever. But
Yep.
it actually turns out like that coffee was like way hotter than it should have been.
Right. It was like it was a mistake that at that one location.
Yeah, it was like 170-degree coffee or something ridiculous. So
But actually, like she got seriously injured. But people thought it was the very. There's a lot we could
well,
go.
I mean, the idea is like, oh, of course your coffee's gonna be hot, like duh. But no, it was like
But it was like
but it was almost
insanely
boiling, basically. Yeah.
right. It was way too hot. Now we're getting on a tangent. Anyways,
Anyway,
we didn't even
I
get to
know.
talk. We didn't even get to talk about the Facebook antitrust suit that's coming up right now. Um, so
No.
take that, Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, what do you really say about that though? It's about time, I guess. Is this? But then again, like again, the cynical part of me is this all coming out because Zuckerberg and Twitter and Facebook are like actually like pushing back against fake news and like and the government's like, wait a minute, we don't like the way you're handling this kind of stuff, so we got to break you guys up, or or is it like legitimate concerns that people have that a lot of people have about these tech companies getting way too big and just controlling way too much, and because we don't seem to have this issue with media companies, right? No one's
Well, there are certain regulations with media companies that have kind of gone. There were more regulations. They've kind of gone downhill, like how many TV stations you can own versus newspapers and yada yada yada. Like you can't. Oh, theoretically, you're not supposed to be able to own like a newspaper and a TV station in the same area
right.
if you're a media conglomerate. But there's been a lot of waivers for that. The whole Facebook, Instagram,
Yeah, now with national
WeChat,
cable too, like how do you regulate that? Like it's a lot harder to.
but we had a chance when these mergers were happening. They could have said no to the mergers.
And that's the other thing too, because that's the argument that Facebook has right now. Is like you guys
So we're
approved
retconning
this.
this now.
It
Like you
wasn't
guys
like
approved it
this
already.
came out of nowhere. Like you guys approved these mergers. Like so.
Like, did
Well,
you
I don't
not
know
see
why
how big Facebook was already?
yeah, I don't
This
know
is
why you're
also
angry
when
now about it.
this is why. I mean, again, hate to say ageism, but when you have people that are of when you have people that aren't into the technology as some people making the regulations, they can't see the writing on the wall. So when you have people that have been in Congress for many years and they're not as tech savvy, they don't use Facebook themselves, they don't understand what it is, but they're making the laws about it. That's where we have the problems.
Well, you saw this during the hearings a few years back.
You know,
I think it was a few years back. Like time
that's
is a
like 10
flat
years
circle. I
ago.
have no idea when things have happened anymore. But you saw Congress people up there like talking to Mark Zuckerberg, and Mark Zuckerberg was like, "What are you talking about?" Like, I think
That's
one of
not
the
how it
questions,
works.
like one of the senators, like, how did you expect this business model to take off? Like, you're not selling anything, and you're giving away your product for free, and Zuckerberg's like, "Oh, I'm selling ad space. Like, what are you talking? Like, what do you mean? Like,
And that's the problem. You have people making these regular. They're not doing the research. They don't understand technology because they're not in the technology. Like they don't
right?"
use
And
it.
a lot of the times they're not actually on Facebook. Like, they're not using the social media. Their staff is using the social media for them,
Right.
so they have no idea exactly. I doubt a lot of these like senators and Congress people are actually like on Facebook. Especially the amount of time that the average person is.
Let me tell you, if I was in office, I would definitely have a social media person doing my stuff for me
If you're,
because
yeah,
it's
I mean, if
one, it takes
not
too
even
much
just
time to
not
do
even
it
about in
yourself.
office, if you have any kind of celebrity to you
Right.
have a social media person posting things for you, like
That's how it
that's how it
works.
works. Like, right? You're way too busy. Like, maybe you might say something to them, like, "Oh, can you post this?" Or like, you might have access to your account, like, "Oh, I want to post this once in a while." But if you're famous and rich enough, you have somebody who does your social media for you.
Right.
So
So like I said, people don't understand. The people that make the rules, that made the rules back when the mergers happened, didn't understand what could possibly go wrong with it, and it's sad that they missed that. But they're trying to retcon it now. And who knows? For me, I would love if Instagram was not part of Facebook anymore. Personally,
I just think it helps, right? It creates and this just becomes like a systemic problem. Like this is just a small like an example of what the bigger problem is. Is just these companies just getting way too large,
right?
and it's a much better situation when you have multiple smaller companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Than one giant company running everything.
Yeah, that's the problem with Apple, Google, Facebook.
Yeah.
They're They're the Amazon, right? That's the big four. They're so big. We use them all, and it's how they work with each other, how closed off they are. Apple's like a walled garden. Everything's within their own ecosystem. They don't really talk outside of itself.
And obviously, you don't have as much. You want to talk about capitalism and competition. You're not going to have as much competition if you only have 4 big companies competing against each other, as opposed to like hundreds of companies, like it used to be back in the day. Obviously, not tech companies, but just in general, like you talk about media conglomerates, like because that's kind of like the same ideology, right? But you instead of having these giant media conglomerates, you have like smaller independent stations running, like competing with each other, and it just makes in the system we have now, it works out better. I don't want to sit here and defend capitalism too much, but
I mean,
but it is the system that we have to work in right now, so we should at least make that the best system that we can.
Right. We can get way into the weeds on this
until the socialist revolution.
The media conglomerate stuff that's a whole nother issue that's caught up in legal battles as well. But I think we should end on this. So after this, I'm going to go post the link to this on Facebook.
Right. Until we get sucked. We're like, wait a minute. Then Zuckerberg's going to realize we're talking about him, and we're going to get fake news.
We're going to get fake news. This generation Xennial, they're fake news.
Listen, if we get to that point, we'll be doing pretty good.
Yeah. So. If someone says we're fake news, that at least we made it somewhere.
So thanks for listening, everybody. Appreciate.
Thanks for hanging out with us. For another week.
Yeah, spending 45 minutes or so and like listening to us rant. As always, you can connect with us at
gxennial@gmail.com or just respond to the comment, write a comment in the wherever you listen to this podcast, whether it's on Spotify, Apple, Google, whatever.
All the media conglomerates that we just said are bad. Just share it.
Share it there.
Share it there. And then drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you guys.
I'm at Keith ZD on Twitter.
Yeah, Ref Vinnie Lax on Twitter. Referee Vinnie Lax on the Instagram. So probably the best ways to connect with me. So yeah.
And please, if you do like this podcast, give us a rating and review. Share it with your friends.
Yeah, definitely share it with your friends, people. Yeah. That helps the channel out a lot. Is the sharing on the social media sites. So
always the sharing. That's
if you do like us, give us a share.
It's
That's
the
what
sharing.
it's for. Sharing. Sharing is caring, people.
Have a good week.
See you next week.